Keep in mind, her job was pursuing and prosecuting mortgage fraud. In fact, Letitia James prosecuted a lot of people, put a lot of people in prison under New York state law for mortgage fraud during her tenure as Attorney General of the state of New York. She knows the law. She sent people to jail for the same things. On one law, she claimed 4 units rather than the actual 5 to get a lower rate. She's looking at $1 million fine over this $130,000 property and in prison for not more than 30 years. This is a 30-year felony, my friends. Hear that, Letitia? All you were trying to do to Trump was bankrupt him and his family. Now you're looking at 30 years in prison, effectively the rest of her life. So let's hear Mike Davis talk about Letitia James on the Laura Ingraham show. Oh, wait, I just saw it was a 4-minute clip. Let's see how quickly they get to the meat.
Here with me, Mike Davis, founder and CEO of the Article 3 Project, Jonathan Fahey, former federal prosecutor who's also assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia where these charges were filed. Both you gentlemen worked together. You were a junior lawyer back then, Mike, and you were like 5 minutes ago, and you were his basic boss, which is so cool. I can't believe that. Anyway, Democrats are saying, Jonathan, this is a minor issue. It's a fishing expedition on Tish, political payback, but is she in trouble?
By reading this indictment, I really think so, because it said specifically she signed something saying this would not be used for a rental property or anything else. It would be used by her. And in fact, she rented it out. And the worst part about it is she made about $18,000 because of doing so, because she got a lower rate. So this isn't some totally insignificant case. I am interested, all of her statements there, or kind of, all the just nonsense.
Bloviation.
But what is the defense? Is she going to say she actually didn't rent it out, or she's going to say she lived there? She's got a problem here, at least by the face of this indictment.
Mike, a lot of those neighbors didn't.
Here's the problem for Letitia James. This is not a subtle case. There are a lot of prosecutions that are very subtle. You're depending on witness testimony. The witnesses might be credible or might not be credible. There's a lot of ambiguity, and the prosecution has a real challenge proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. These mortgage fraud cases are not like that. They're more like possession cases, where someone's caught in possession of contraband, illicit drugs, guns they're not supposed to have, stuff having to do with children. I'll leave it at that. The possession is the crime. So if they're caught in possession of the stuff, it's an automatic conviction. In fact, they tend to put a little inside dirty laundry from prosecutors' offices. They often assign these no way to lose cases to the female prosecutors in the office. Just saying. And this is very much like those possession cases, because she signed the documents. It's the same for Lisa Cook. She signed the mortgage documents. It's the same for Adam Schiff. And the documents are all on record. They can't be hidden. Mostly they're public records, so they're accessible by anyone. So these tend to be open and shut cases. And normal American citizens are put in prison for this kind of mortgage fraud every year. It's the most common thing in the world.
Seem to see her a lot.
When they're caught, unfortunately, a lot of people lie on their mortgages, like people lie when they apply for credit cards. If nobody bothers to look, they just get away with it. It's when someone bothers to look and then it's discovered. But as you saw, these are $1 million fine, 30-year federal prison sentence crimes.
Turned out, right? She wasn't in town a lot. Maybe they just missed her.
Well, because under New York statute, the New York Attorney General has to reside in New York. So I don't know how you can reside in New York and also have this
Bilocate.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
So that's another kind of unique facet to the Letitia James mortgage fraud, is to be under the New York State Constitution, to be the New York State Attorney General, your principal residence has to be in New York. Now, the indictment actually refers to this as a second residence, so she may be covered there. She can say, my principal residence was in New York, and this was a vacation home, tended to be occupied exclusively by me, but not as my principal residence. So she may be covered there. It doesn't cover her for renting it out, however. That's a different matter. The truth is beginning to set in. Letitia James did commit mortgage fraud, and they know it. Her tribe knows it. It's airtight. She's effed. Now they'll shift to the liberal cascade I shared with you earlier that, well, okay, first we said she didn't do it. Now we're going to say, well, she did it, but it wasn't a big deal. And then they'll shift to, well, she did it, but everybody does it. And then they'll shift to, well, she did it, but you're a racist for noticing. Right, as he says, next racism will be the next excuse. That's how they tend to play this game. Grant Cardone, grand jury indicts Letitia James for 2 counts of mortgage fraud. He writes, I've been in real estate for 40 years and falsifying the number of units and purpose is mortgage fraud. Keep in mind, her job was pursuing and prosecuting mortgage fraud. In fact, Letitia James prosecuted a lot of people, put a lot of people in prison under New York state law for mortgage fraud during her tenure as Attorney General of the state of New York. She knows the law. She sent people to jail for the same things. On one law, she claimed 4 units rather than the actual 5 to get a lower rate. This is fraud. And another, she claimed the primary residence where she didn't live in the state. Both are fraud. So this allegation here about 4 units rather than 5, I believe that's a property in New York. So that's not part of this indictment, which is specific to the property in Virginia. But she had purchased a investment property of a number of apartments. And she claimed it had 4 rental units and it had 5 rental units. And you'd think, why would that be a big deal? It just happens that when you suddenly exceed the threshold of 4 units to 5 units, everything changes. The cost of renting the property becomes enormously greater. Is it an arbitrary threshold? Sure, but they have to set it someplace. They're trying to differentiate like a small occupied owned rental complex building from something that has hundreds of apartments. So they set the rule. So if it's only 4 rental units, that's one thing. But if it's more than that, it's a much bigger affair. And it costs a lot more money to get the financing. So she lied on that too. That'll have to be the basis for some different indictment. Oh, I just thought this was funny. Photo number 1, a woman with a mortgage claiming primary residence in New York. Photo number 2, a woman with a mortgage claiming primary residence in Virginia. It's the same photo. It's the same photo. Now, I have to say, it does bother me a little bit. I have to be fair. This is not actually what she's accused of doing. She's not actually accused of having 2 primary residences in different states. Lisa Cook is accused of that form of mortgage fraud. Letitia James, engaged in a different form of mortgage fraud. She said, sure, I have a primary residence in New York, and I have a owner-occupied, non-rental vacation home in Virginia. That got her lower mortgage rates, lower insurance, and she lied about that. It wasn't a vacation home. It wasn't a secondary residence exclusively to be occupied by her. It was a rental property. So that's her particular form of fraud, just to be accurate. Elizabeth McDonald from Fox, apparently reading the indictment against Letitia James, the bank fraud charge is based on James telling her bank lender she was not going to use the home she bought in Virginia as a rental property when she did rent it out. She got a lower rate down to 3 from about 4, saving her about $18,000. Yep, that's exactly what the indictment says. And it's really going to be incontestable, folks. These are the kinds of documents they have for both the apartment complex. Where is that apartment complex? Let's see if we can see it on this document. City of New York. Yeah, so I think it's an apartment building in Brooklyn. She lied about how many rental units it had. And then, of course, we have, let's see, this is also New York. So these are documents. This will be the fraud case against her for the Brooklyn apartment. That's above and beyond the federal fraud case against her for the Virginia property. So she could have 2 trials running simultaneously, either in different districts or they could be merged potentially into one federal court. Apparently, she also got her father to sign as her husband onto the mortgage. So why would a mortgage company give you a lower interest rate if it's a husband and wife buying the property as opposed to a single person buying the property? Because then they have 2 incomes to go after, right? If someone defaults on the mortgage, there's 2 people on the hook. That lowers their risk, so they give you a lower interest rate. Well, Letitia James wanted the lower interest rate, but she wasn't married. She didn't have a husband to put down. But her dad has the same last name, doesn't he? So she had her father sign the mortgage document as her husband. More mortgage fraud. By the way, on his part too now. If this were being reversed, if Trump had done this and Letitia James was the prosecutor, you think Letitia James would be going after Trump for having, I don't know, his one of his sons sign the mortgage document as his father? Sure she would. Of course she would. I wonder if they're going to go after the father here. How old must that guy be if she's 66? He can't be any spring chicken. And my buddy Jack Posobiec notes, Letitia James deserves every bit of what's coming to her and then some. And I have to agree. I have to agree with all of that. Kelly Sue, $10. Says, after reading the statutes for aiding and abetting, isn't paying for illegal health care against our will illegal? Wouldn't the entire Democrat Party be liable? I think a bunch of these government officials in these sanctuary states are all liable for harboring illegal migrant third world invaders. And that's a federal felony, potentially punishable by death. In fact, I just saw a news story this morning. I forgot to set it aside, but it was an illegal migrant, I think in Chicago, who killed a bunch of people drunk driving. Well, the harboring statute says it's unlawful to harbor an illegal migrant third world invader, provide them with shelter, protection, keep them unaccountable to the immigration authorities. And if you harbor them and they end up killing an American, you're subject to the death penalty. You're subject to execution. So where are all these Chicago politicians and Illinois politicians who harbored this particular guy? By establishing the policies that would not allow for ICE detainers that left him on the streets to murder American citizens with his drunk driving. Why are they not being charged with a death penalty offense? Because the law allows for that. Pam Bondi, where are you, sweetie? Talk is cheap, honey. Never pay attention to what women say. Pay attention to what they do. Often insightful stuff to say. He writes, on Tish James, here's what you need to know. If the facts alleged in the complaint are true, or really now they're in the indictment, which seems very likely, then Tish James committed garden variety mortgage fraud, which plenty of normal citizens have been prosecuted for and convicted. There's no novel theory, legal theory here. There's no use of a 200-year-old statute that hasn't been charged in who knows how long, which is the kind of stuff Letitia James used against Trump. There's no repurposing of an obstruction statute to cover behavior not contemplated. Again, that's what the left prosecutors do against Trump. If the complaint is true, she just told the bank she would use the property as a second home and promptly rented it out to tenants. By lying about her intended use of the property, she got a lower rate from the banks than she would have otherwise. Then I'm going to summarize the rest of it. He goes on to say that, traditionally, politicians would not pursue their political opponents in this kind of way. They might let this slide. He refers to it as honor among politicians. I don't know. I would call it honor among thieves, really. But to not make it seem like they were engaging in political vengeance. They might not pursue these kinds of cases. Much akin to how Hillary was not pursued for her email server and many other felonies. But then he notes, they went after Trump. And so they've opened a box that can only be adequately dealt with by reprisal. He doesn't use the word reprisal. I'm using the word reprisal. This, see if I can find the image real quick. Yeah, this changes everything. These are all the Trump and his lawyers and his advisors, his valet they prosecuted. And that changes everything, because if they're going to do that, and obviously they did it very aggressively. They put a lot of these people in prison, and then they had to be pardoned. They tried their best to put Trump in prison for 100 years and bankrupt his entire Trump enterprise. So they weren't joking around. This is a very serious business. And if one political party is going to do that, as the Democrats did to the Republicans, the only rational response is reprisal when you're in power. Punish them with the same stick. Otherwise, there's no incentive for them not to do it forever. It only damages their enemies and never harms them. And if you're not familiar with what a reprisal is, it comes from the laws of war. So a reprisal would allow for conduct that would normally be unlawful, a violation of law, even in time of war, but is allowed as a necessary lesson to the other side for something they've done wrong. So imagine you have two sides in a war. And side A captures a bunch of soldiers from side B. They honorably surrendered. They're prisoners of war. These Army B soldiers, and Army B just executes them, has 100 of them and just executes them, puts them against the wall and executes them. Well, as a reprisal, Army B might take 1,000 of their prisoners of war from Army A and execute them to send the message back to the other side. Now, of course, you can't normally do that. Executing prisoners would normally be wrong, but the laws of war allow for reprisal when the other side has violated the laws of war to correct their misconduct and make sure they suffer a consequence for that misconduct. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So it's necessary. It's necessary is what we're saying. William Jacobson. If you don't know Bill Jacobson, he runs the website Legal Insurrection. He's a professor at Cornell Law School. I've done a ton of writing for them in years past. I think they do great work over there. So you should check them out, Legal Insurrection. He writes in response to Will's piece about, hey, sometimes you have to engage in reprisal. He says, this is exactly right. Letitia James ran a campaign for New York Attorney General promising to use the full force of the office, not only to get her political opponent Donald Trump, but also his family. Don't ignore that this was an attempt to wipe out the Trump family. We heard that clip from her earlier at the start of the show. Well, again, they tried to put the next president of the United States in jail for the rest of his life because one of his subordinates clicked the wrong box on a drop-down menu in QuickBooks. We cannot and will not forget. And again, remember, in that case, none of the parties who were alleged to have been defrauded, who Letitia James alleged to have been defrauded, they all testified in open court under oath. We were not defrauded. Whatever representations Trump made, we did not rely on those. We made our own evaluations of the property. So we were not defrauded. Fraud requires not just an attempt to defraud, but also reliance on the fraud. That's one of the elements of the offense. And that just did not happen. There was no evidence of that. Kyle Becker, Letitia James selectively and vindictively prosecuted a former president of the United States, an election candidate, because he was running for re-election, over a sham real estate case with no known victims while openly bragging about her corrupt intentions. Trump was denied due process in that civil case brought by Letitia James because the equally corrupt judge suppressed exculpatory evidence. This was part of an all-out effort by the Democrats to bankrupt and imprison a former president because he had overcome 2 sham impeachments. Remember, they impeached Trump twice, the democratically controlled Congress, but just were not able to convict him in the Senate, and even assassination attempts. And Trump might potentially win the 2024 election, which of course he did, just like he won the 2020 election that they stole. After Trump prevailed in the 2024 election again, an appeals court looked at Letitia James' dirty case against him and tossed out the massive $500 million civil penalty. This underscored how the case was tainted by corruption, as even she had announced her motive during her campaign to become New York Attorney General by vowing to get Trump. By the way, state attorney generals have been removed from cases and removed from office for making these kinds of campaign vows to politically pursue enemies. Then it turns out the documents show it was Letitia James who allegedly committed real estate fraud for tax evasion purposes, an interest rate, an insurance rate, and a grand jury indicted her for it. Save your selective moral outrage for your low information voters. That would be the Brian Krasenstein audience we talked about earlier. They changed the laws to get Trump, and all they had to do was follow the law to get Letitia James. See the difference? And indeed, it is a difference.